about love. I'm simply mad about love. Mad about you and all the things you do. When you're near, what do I hear, dear? Angels start to sing in my heart. Yes.
Hi, I'm Cathy Richey.
And I'm Charlie Young.
And that was Mae Carlisle singing Mad About Love. We're here with the first of our series on Unheard of Jazz, uncovering some of the lost or rarely heard artists or their music from the big band swing era.
And today we're highlighting Mae Carlisle, a forgotten composer, singer, and pianist from the era, starting from the 1930s through the early 1950s.
You know, Charlie, in a genre dominated by men, if asked to name a few female artists of the period, people often struggle after naming just a couple performers. Can you think of any?
Well, certainly Ella Fitzgerald, and, Billie Holiday's going to come to mind, but after that, I struggle.
And, few remember Mae or her songs, much less know about her, and how significant she was as a pioneer for women. And as a woman of color, she described herself as having both a Black and an American Indian heritage. Charlie, what do you know about Mae?
Well, my initial inquiries about her for the podcast came up pretty empty. I was contacting the country's foremost archives regarding jazz.
And who would that be?
Well, the New Orleans Jazz Museum, for one. And they had just a single article, a 78 recording of just one of her songs.
Oh, that's a shame.
And I also contacted the American Jazz Museum in Kansas City and the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. Both of them wrote back that they had absolutely nothing in their files regarding her.
And then I suppose an internet search pulled up little also.
Correct. It had little to say. Most of that was redundant. But fortunately, the files at Denton and Haskins had materials documenting parts of her life, along with the significance of her career and the contributions she made to jazz, as well as breaking the color barriers at the time. Some of the personal history that we're going to relate today hasn't ever been heard before.
I know. I'm excited about that. And I feel so lucky that your uncle's company has this material. Charlie, how did Denton and Haskins come to publish and record Mae's music?
Well, actually, it was my uncle who first went into the music business, Barney Young. He started his career as a Harvard lawyer, but he had a talent for music himself and thought that probably the music industry would be a good application for his law degree. So he began in the 1930s buying up some smaller music companies along with the songs of writers of the day. And he began to manage some of those writers as clients.
And then I suppose Mae was one of his clients?
Yes, and they formed a strong friendship over time. They also ended up collaborating on writing some of her songs, both on the words and the music of the compositions.
And digging through the company archives on Mae, one of the first things I found was an article in Ebony magazine from January 1952. And the title read, "Popular Singer is the only Negro musician with one coast-to-coast network radio program." That seems kind of like a big deal back then.
Yeah, Cathy, it was. I think it's pretty significant and quite an achievement for anyone in such a competitive field, but particularly for a Black female in the early 50s. And fan mail for the show proved it was popular. It was carried by over 100 stations for the American Broadcasting Company.
So 100 stations back then, is that a lot?
It is. In fact, the stats for those stations showed that over 7.5 million listeners were tuning in across the nation.
And it was all live, nothing recorded,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay.
And the show had a 15-minute format. She would usually perform 3 numbers, and it was broadcast during prime time.
So before we get into a little more about Mae, what are some of the songs she played?
Well, here's one, Ohi-Ohio Boogie. She was born in Ohio, and for the radio, she would sing while playing the piano. But for her recording, she often would sing with other instruments for accompaniment. This particular clip is kind of interesting because it's an air check where you can actually hear her speak and understand, I think, how her voice played much of her charm and how she connected with folks.
But let's get back to the present now. I'm told that you are now a staff member of Columbia Records, as well as a recording artist for them. That must be quite a job for you, isn't it?
Oh, I love it. I think it's wonderful. I'm very thrilled with the idea.
What are you doing with them? Want to tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, well, I'm recording every month and writing material, and which I love. I love it all, every angle of it. And it's very, very wonderful to be on a major label after having been off for 10 years.
10 years, not a long
Mm-hmm.
while.
Yeah.
Do you expect you're putting out any more?
Well, I have a new one out right now.
What is it?
I've called it Ohio Boogie. Don't you think it's fitting?
Sounds wonderful. From your hometown, no doubt, huh?
Yes.
Suppose you play a little bit of it for us now, huh?
All right, I'd love to.
Ohio Boogie.
All right.
Take it away.
Oh, hi, boogie. Oh, hi, boogie. Where the cool wind blows and the tall grass grows. Oh, hi.
You know, I love listening to her voice, and listening to her, she clearly had that sound of the period, which they called swing or big band era. You know, back then, the swing era was the pop music and dance music of the 1930s and 40s.
Yeah, the orchestras were large, and they had a brassy, loud sound. They all had a horn section with saxophones, clarinets, trombones, trumpets.
And also there was a rhythm section consisting of drums, piano, and bass guitar. So swing music was a danceable music that had a clear, simple melody and a strong beat.
Fats Waller, who was a big name at the time, when asked, how do you describe swing? He said, if you gotta ask, you'll never know.
Yeah, and I've heard others say, you can feel it, but you just can't explain it.
Yeah.
So Charlie, how did Una Mae fit in the swing era?
Well, she was a top female vocalist and an accomplished pianist, prolific songwriter. She wrote more than 500 songs. And for over a month in 1941, she had 2 songs that were part of the hit parade. That was pretty unusual for any artist.
Wow. What would be a good example of her songs at that time?
I think one that demonstrates that strong beat that you described as, characteristic of swing and also evidences the lively, kind of sassy sound of brass is 3 Little Bugs.
3 little bugs in a rug got together. 'Cause 3 little bugs in a rug get along. Oh, 3 little bugs in a rug said forever that they would never do each other wrong. Now one was simple.
I love that tune. What a catchy, happy melody. Given her prominence at the time, why don't we know more about her or her music today?
Well, she was prominent. I think people were thrilled by a hypnotic voice, her lyrics, her versatility, let alone the sound of her music.
But why do you think she became somewhat of a lost artist?
I think the main reason for that was that she died at an early age. She was only 41 when complications from abdominal cancer ended her life and career. Without her physical presence to continue to perform, her previous works just became less known.
Well, you're probably right, because it was still an age when there was a limited access to artist music for one's own home collection.
Yeah, artists were known because of their presence live on radio or playing and performing at places like the Blue Room at the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans, or the Stork Club or the Copacabana in New York, or other popular venues in Beverly Hills or around the country.
So then their recorded works were few and hard to obtain, and probably home entertainment systems to replay these tunes were scarce and rudimentary.
So it seems.
So I think another thing that really sparkles about Una Mae is her own story of how a small town girl makes it big.
Oh, you're absolutely right. She did.
And you know, someone born in 1915 in Xenia, Ohio, let alone a person of color, was unlikely to find it easy to go as far as she did.
She was a bit of a child prodigy, though she also did receive some formal training on piano.
And she was lucky enough to apparently be seen by Duke Ellington, who was then instrumental in her obtaining work at a radio station in Cleveland.
Yeah, and, shortly after that, while she was still in her mid-teens, mind you, she became a protege of Fats Waller in Cincinnati.
So, Charlie, when do you think she had her biggest break?
It seems to me like her biggest break came in 1936 when Lou Leslie offered her a spot with the Lou Leslie Blackbirds. She crossed the Atlantic with them and opened in Europe, and then became popular in Paris and London, Madrid, Riviera, even Cairo. All those cities she toured. And it was also in Europe where she cut her first records.
And she was quite a success, I'd say, with admirers like the Duke of Kent flying to the continent to take in her shows before the war, and then being invited to Cairo to play for Egypt's King Farouk's wedding.
Yeah, and for 3 years she performed at Le Boeuf sur le Toit.
What is that?
Well, that was a Parisian cabaret. She did that prior to opening her own club in Montmartre. Montmartre was kind of like the Greenwich Village of Paris.
And what did the name of the club mean?
Well, Le Boeuf sur le Toit, that translates to the ox on the roof, and it was a famous gathering spot for musicians in Paris in the 30s.
Wouldn't you have loved to have been there and listened to that?
Yes. Actually, the expression faire un boeuf came from the club's name. Throughout Europe still today, it is a term used for having a jam session.
Okay, so that was in Europe. But in America, the prejudice facing blacks at that time were more prevalent, which must have become a deciding factor in her career.
I guess sort of like you mentioned, the part of the reason in the 1930s that she went to Europe with Lou Leslie was that there was just a lot of prejudice in the States, and a lot of black artists were heading over abroad, which is where they made their name for themselves. And probably if it hadn't been for the coming of World War II in Europe, she would have probably stayed there. But with that, in around 1940, those realities of war caused her to make a practical decision to return home.
So, Charlie, what happened when she returned home?
Well, returning to the States in the 40s, she cut over 10 records on the Bluebird label with trumpeter Benny Carter, bass Slam Stewart, and drummer Zutty Singleton. Her previous association with Fats Waller led to a recording with Fats and his rhythm band titled I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Baby. That song was a hit. It paved the way for her to return to her performing circuit in the States. Unfortunately, the recording ban of 1942 may have slowed her career.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about the recording ban of 1942. It's something often referenced as to one of the reasons the big band era ended.
Yeah, in a nutshell, the musicians' union felt that they were losing jobs due to canned music.
And you mean canned music that radio stations were beginning to play recordings rather than live music?
Exactly. The musicians' union asked for royalties to be paid to the union for a fund for out-of-work musicians. They said, these musicians are being put out of work by these records being played. The strike lasted about 2 years, but it changed the course of how music was brought into homes across the nation.
Yeah, and I remember as myself growing up, I went through a lot of music, the way I got music, from 45s to 78s to 33 vinyl records, and then you went to 8-track, and then you went to the cassettes.
And here it was going from radio, and the radio stations were beginning to play records. Well, it wasn't long after they started selling a lot of record players to homes, and people were buying records and playing it in their homes.
Right, rather than listening to radio. And so it just shows you how technology changed the music business drastically.
It did.
So then fewer and fewer stations had in-house orchestras playing live music.
Correct. And not long after the strike ended, UNMA returned to recording, but soon began to suffer a variety of health problems.
Like what?
The earlier ones were from recurrent mastoid infections, and then later ones developing from cancer that required years of surgeries, hospitalizations, rehabilitation periods.
How did that affect her music?
Oh, well, I feel it really did affect her music. It changed to reflect what she was going through in her personal life with her illnesses, but also marital problems, and she was leading toward a divorce then.
Wow. That would certainly be understandable because illness affects so much of what we do and who we are.
Yeah, right.
Charlie, can you give me an example of a song that may reflect what Una Mae might have been experiencing at that time?
Oh, yeah, sure. But let me actually play you a succession of brief clips from the early 50s. Maybe you can pick up on what I was talking about, this transition where you can hear periods where the music says, I'm in good health, and then where the music, you can kind of get a feeling there's illness going on there, and then recovery and good health again, and then illness again.
The best idea you had was falling in love with me. The best idea you had. We've all got a lesson to learn. Yes, we've all got a lesson. Do you please me? Do you tease me? Do you squeeze me? Baby, what do you do to me? Gone, gone, gone. Strange how once you fall in love, frenzy is known by those who are in love.
What you heard there sequentially were the best idea you had, and then we've all got a lesson to learn, then do, and then gone, and then strange, and the last song was frenzy.
You know, so often we hear the music of an artist without understanding the motivation or what was happening to them as individuals that led to their particular creativity.
That's so true.
You can just feel the pain in this song, and the title even strikes me. The title, Frenzy, is pretty apropos of that song.
Una Mae was a person who broke barriers, but perhaps the biggest barrier or hurdle she had to overcome was her own physical problems. I sent you a package, Cathy, with some of Una Mae's correspondence that she was having with my uncle, and I was hoping you'd get a feel for her personally. Did you find anything in those letters that maybe connected you to her or her music?
Oh, yeah. The letters were a great insight. And there are two things I think that struck me most, aside from feeling a bit like she was talking to me. First, I felt the difficulties she was experiencing health-wise. But then, given the severity of what she was going through, I was impressed by her strong spirit to make a comeback.
There was an intimacy, I think, revealed about the closeness of family in those letters, of her aunt, who she called Mama, and then the estrangement she felt for her biologic mother.
Let me read to you just a portion of one or two of her letters to illustrate. This is from a letter dated January 1954, when she was in Springfield, Ohio. She's writing to Barney Young, your uncle, who was the president of Denton and Haskins. It reads, Dear Barney, it was so nice hearing your voice the other day. It seemed as though I was in New York. You never had a secretary do the writing, talking between us, and we always had a few secrets, or so I thought. I'd like it to remain that way. I'm going to tell you what kind of operation I had. And then Una Mae continues writing. She says, so you see, I've had 3 operations in one, and I mean it was terrible. I've never been so sick as this, and actually, I don't know what I could or would have done if it hadn't been for Mama.
You know, and that was her aunt now.
Right. And then she continues, she says her aunt didn't miss a day coming to the hospital, and I was in there for almost 5 weeks. You can't beat that since she doesn't make much money. Food is high, meaning it was expensive, and anything I think I want, she tries to get, plus my medicine. My medicine bill alone is quite large. Of course, your check really came in handy, Barney, the other day. We didn't have any coal.
Oh, wow. And when she says that, it just takes me right into her home, and I feel the coldness in Ohio at that time.
Right, because they use coal for heating. And then she writes, I can't catch cold, and I don't depend on my mother or sister, and I thank God in all humility for my recovery. This really makes your heart go out to her.
But she does recover.
When?
Well, a year later in January of 1955.
Wow, so that was just 1 year. And then she writes, I start my radio show Monday. I'm quite pleased about it, and if you want any music played, I suggest you send it to me. I have a TV show coming up next, just as soon as the dentist fixes my teeth. Isn't that grand? All those people that said I was finished can just watch my dust. I love that part. And she says, I haven't even started yet. I aim to go just as high as I possibly can, God willing. The sky is the limit, and I've never been more serious in my whole life. Then, the following year, she's gone, officially dying of complications from pneumonia. So, Charlie, her career as well as her life basically ended when she was 41 years old.
Well, though, Cathy, in a sense, she did continue to live on, I think in part through those letters, and always through her music. She was able to transcend everything, and still artfully, her music evolved with the times. Sometimes pithy, sometimes melancholy, but always stylistically.
And one of her last compositions had more of a rhythm and blues sound, and that may be an upbeat way to wrap up our session today about Una Mae. So let's play There's a Rhythm in the Breeze, the music by Una Mae, lyrics by your Uncle Barney, and performed by musician John Greer. Thanks for being here with me today, Charlie, and for sharing some of Una Mae's personal history.
It's been a pleasure.
So until next time, this is Cathy Richey.
And Charlie Young.
And look for our next podcast on Unheard of Jazz.
To hear new facts, stories, and of course, music from the big band swing era.
And now let's hear There's a Rhythm in the Breeze.
Fill me with delight. And now the memory, I find it haunting me, like the rhythm in the breeze when I held you in my arms. Romance was in the air when I kissed your lips so warm. I felt a thrill beyond compare. Hurry back, oh, won't you please? Set my aching heart at ease and whisper tenderly sweet little things to me, like the rhythm in the breeze. When I kissed your lips so warm, I felt a thrill beyond compare. Hurry back, oh, won't you please? Set my aching heart at ease and whisper tenderly sweet little things to me,